Today's story will change the way you perceive yourself and will reinforce just how small we as humans are when compared with something like the vast ocean. However, before jumping into today's story, if you're a fan of the Dirty Coffee Cup channel where we tell compelling, controversial, and creepy stories daily, please like and subscribe to the channel. We would really appreciate it. Now, on to today's story. So, on the morning of July 20th, 1968, a small fishing boat called El Fausto took off from La Palma, which is a remote port in the Canary Islands, and it's a very remote port. Not a whole lot of people live there. And on this fishing boat were two brothers, Ramon and Eliberto Hernandez, and cousin Miguel Acosta. Now, the plan for this trip was to just go 50 miles due south to another small island in the Canaries known as El Hierro. And on this trip, the ideal was to trip there one day, drop off the supplies that they needed, load some more supplies to take back to La Palma, and trip back in the second half of the day or potentially the next day. Now, what they didn't know was just what they would run into when they reached El Hierro. So the two brothers and the cousin, they sail across 50 miles south to this other island, El Hierro. And when they get there, they start unloading their cargo, which this cargo they had taken there was explosives used for agriculture, I guess, on that island probably to move some land. However, after they unload the cargo, they're loading up some new cargo to take back with them, loading some food, specifically 22 pounds of fruit and some fresh water. And while they're loading this cargo out on the dock, Julio Garcia runs up to these guys. And Julio Garcia is just another man. They don't know who he is at this time. And he's frantically waving his hands, and by the time he gets up to him, they could finally make him out. He's begging for them to take him on a ride back to La Palma. And what has happened is his 2-year-old daughter has gotten very sick back on La Palma. And he tried to get on the ferry earlier that day, but he couldn't get on the ferry. So he's begging these fishermen, please take me back to La Palma with you, please. And the fishermen say, of course, no problem. You don't have to pay us. We'd be happy to help you. So the men move quickly, working into the night, loading all the rest of their materials to get back, and they leave that night at 2:30 a.m. in a big rush to get Julia back to La Palma so that he could see his daughter, who's gravely sick. Now, they're leaving into the middle of the pitch black ocean, but for these men who've sailed this water their whole lives, this is no problem. They're thinking it's just a couple hours away, they'll be back in no time. Now, weather was even remotely good at the time with only a light mist and fog, so for these men, this journey really was nothing out of the ordinary at all. However, come 10 a.m. back in La Palma, the owner of the boat is at the dock, and he's wondering, where are these men? They should be here by now, especially with the tides and weather that night. However, he's not worried. He normally goes out on these boats with the brothers and their cousin, and he's seen them sail in all types of seas. And knowing the weather that night, he had nothing to be concerned with. So he's waiting, and now it's 11 a.m. and the families are getting very upset. They're saying, oh, they should be here by now. And so the owner of the boat, he says, okay, let's go ahead and send out a search party. So he sends out a search boat with 4 other men on it, and they go out and they take the same course that the brothers and their cousin did from La Palma to El Hierro, and they don't find any sign of them. So they go back to the island and they report, hey, we didn't find them. And at this point, the owner of the boat is now starting to grow a lot more concerned. He knows that these men are strong men, and yes, they're capable of sailing, and they've sailed these waters their whole life. But at this point, it's getting pretty scary because they, especially with them having Julio, they should have been back by now. But he's still crossing his fingers at this point, and at this point, the owner of the boat contacts local authorities and tells them, hey, we've already sent out people looking, and we can't find these men anywhere. So the authorities and everybody else that they got involved starts looking for these men, and they've launched a full-scale search at this point. And they know when they're looking for these men, they only have 20 pounds of fruit and a couple days worth of water. So they are searching as hard as they possibly can, but they turn up nothing. Now, 4 days later, and 120 miles west of where the four men set off from, a British ship called Lakessa finds the boat, and it's the four men waving for them, pleading for help. And so the big ship, Lakessa, gets up next to the four men, and they tie up to each other, and they start talking to the men, and sure enough, this is the four men who are missing, and they let them radios into their family, telling them, hey, you're going to be safe, radio the authorities, say, hey, we found them. And then they start giving them some food and water, and the men seem to be in good spirits, as if they've done well out here for the past 4 days, lost on the water, and they're not scared at all. Now, where things take a weird turn is after an hour or so of getting some food and getting some water, getting supplies, the four men say, okay, we think we'll take it back off on our boat and trek back. And to the dismay of the Lakessa, which is a huge ship and could easily help tow them in or wait with them until the authorities get there. No, the four men want to set off into the water with just some supplies. That's all they need, apparently. And now all the men on the Lakessa are arguing them like, hey, you're going to get lost at sea. You're 120 miles away. But these men are adamant that they could get back just fine. And so they have no choice but to let them go. And so off the four men it go again, freshly stocked with supplies, over 120 miles west, off course of where they once set off. And now their family is in good spirits again, expecting them back at the docks, because at this point they know they're alive, they know they're well, and they should be home soon. So that's what they're expecting. Now, at this point, the captain of the Lakessa he's just bewildered, because the last conversation he had with this man was a very serious conversation. And he asked them, he said, look, what's wrong with your boat? What's wrong with you guys? You're 120 miles off course, west of where you first set out. You have the military of multiple countries looking for you. You have a ton of resources, and you guys just want to leave when we can bring you back to shore and, make sure that you get to see your family and kids again. And no matter what, all the pleading and bargaining, those men just wanted to go. And so when they left, the captain of the Lakessa, he called back into the authorities and let them know, hey, they set off again. So the authorities actually kept looking for them over these next coming 2 weeks, and they couldn't find them anywhere. They were searching a huge radius with planes, ships, you name it, and they can't find them anywhere. And so after 2 weeks, they just they call them dead. They were left for dead at sea, and that's what it is. So that's what they're called. And however, then a couple weeks later, another huge container ship making a transatlantic journey is crossing through the sea, and they see this small little ship, or what is a small ship relatively compared to huge container ships that are normally making transatlantic journeys. And they see the ship just bobbing, and so they're getting closer and closer, and they're going to pull up to the ship and make sure these people don't need help because they're so out of place in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And as they get closer, they could tell no one is steering the ship. They can't see anybody on the ship. And so they pull up right beside the ship and tie off to it. And this is when they discover the tragic events that took place. And so the sailors from the Ana de Mayo, after tying off to the El Fausto, are board the boat, and they're in search of, any logbook that'll tell them how this boat got here, or some notebook that can tell them, what happened and why this seaworthy boat is just in the middle of the ocean without a crew, apparently. And so they're really confused as they're searching the boat relentlessly and can't find a clue as to why it's possibly here. And so they alert authorities, and they already know this is a missing boat, and so they figure, you know what, we'll just tow this boat back. But before getting off the boat and tying it up to tow it, they check the engine room. And in the engine room, what they find is a dead man laying on his back, and they can't make out exactly what the man looks like due to decomposition after a couple weeks being out here on the water. And so, but this man does have a notebook right behind his back. And so they take this notebook with them, and them being French and the notebook being written in broken Spanglish, they couldn't read this broken Spanish. They did know some Spanish, but they couldn't read this handwriting. And so They figure we'll tow the boat back, and that'll tell part of the story, and hopefully this notebook can be read by somebody, and that'll tell the other part of this story. And so they start telling back the El Fausto, and when they're towing this boat back, all of a sudden the tow line just completely snaps, and this boat sinks quick. And so they weren't able to recover the boat. And of course, the authorities are upset, but the sailors said they were towing it, using proper methods. But, the boat just ultimately ended up sinking. And, there's really no one to blame. It's just, another eerie thing that happens here. And so at this point, the body was still in the boat, of course. And at this point, now there's no body to identify. There's a lot less physical evidence, and all they have left is this notebook with the broken Spanglish, which they cannot read. And so they are taking this back to shore and going to let the authorities examine it and try and piece together what possibly happened with these 4 sailors that could have, or 3 sailors and one man who just wanted to see his daughter. What could have happened to them when they could have been saved just weeks earlier by a huge ship? Why did they choose to set off again? Hopefully this notebook contains those answers. And here's what the authorities find. So the authorities take the notebook, and at this point they're still not sure. There's no identifying marks in the notebook to be certain who the owner of the notebook is. So essentially what they do is they take the 4 wives of the men who were on the ship and have them all examine the notebook. And immediately, Julio, the one man who was not a sailor and was just on the boat to go back to see his daughter, his wife quickly recognized the handwriting because he had a distinct handwriting. And after looking through the notebook, most of the pages were just invoices and notes about cars and things of that nature that he had to fix because he was a mechanic. But the last page gave a little bit of insight. The last page it looked like it was connected to more pages, but 28 pages prior to the last page were torn out of the book. And that was never explained. Nobody ever had an answer for that, and they were never found. They were maybe on the boat, but that sunk to the bottom of the ocean. However, so on that last page, what was given was instructions on how to access their life insurance policy and how to file a claim for it. And then in addition, it went on to mention that don't be upset, God had this fate for me, and in as well as please do not tell our son any of this information. So it was just kind of suspicious that that's all the book had in it, and that there was 28 pages missing. So there was really never a lot of closure for the 4 families whose husbands, sons were the men that were lost for good. But essentially, a lot of people speculate that maybe pirates had something to do with it, but really nobody knows till this day. So that's going to be it, guys. That's going to be the whole story about the El Fausto and the 4 men that sailed that ship. And yeah, let us know what you think down in the comments.